My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything, while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else. And yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. You say nothing in life is black or white, but that is a lie, a very dangerous lie. Either we prevent a 1.5 degree of warming or we don't. Either we choose to go on as a civilization or we don't. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have run out of excuses and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not.
You should know that Greta Thunberg was invited to this stage, but not only at the age of 16 does she take her schoolwork seriously, she also takes environmentalism seriously. So she does not fly, and it would have taken her a very long time to get here by boat. Good evening, I'm Juju Chang. I'm with ABC News Nightline, and to my right, I have a distinguished panel. You know, last year we heard from scientists that we have 12 years, essentially, to avert irreversible and catastrophic warming of our climate. So Greta, in fact, is right. Change is coming, and the question is, what kind of change? Either we adapt our global economy, our consumption habits, and almost every aspect of our lives, or change will come to us in the form of extreme weather, food and water insecurity, global instability, and an uncertain future. That is, of course, the doom and gloom scenario, and we are joined by these four women whose focus primarily is quite literally saving the planet. Beside me are Cristina Mittermeier. Born and raised in Mexico, Cristina is a writer, a photographer, a storyteller, really, and a conservationist. Next to her is Christiana Figueres, and she's Costa Rican. You've gotten some hoops in the audience. Costa Rican by background, a citizen of the world. All of these women are. Former UN climate chief and architect of the Paris Accords who led negotiations for the historic agreement. Beside her, you can clap, yes. I'm clapping on the inside. Beside her is Dr. Mae Jemison, an engineer, a doctor, an educator, more hoops and hollers, and was the first woman of color in space as a NASA astronaut. And next to Mae is Nina Lakhani, a journalist based in Mexico City who reports on environmental issues and its impacts on communities across the globe, but most especially indigenous communities across Central America. Welcome to you all, ladies. Christiana, I want to start with you. You recently spoke on a panel with Greta, and I know that the message from young people is often fear and panic, and so I want to get you to lay out for us the doom and gloom scenario, if you will. What happens if we miss the 1.5 Celsius global warming target that you tried to work to fight against? Because I know that for you, the big idea is to infuse relentless optimism to galvanize people to work.
So we actually only know that very recently. It's only since October of last year that the climate scientists have actually been able to get into the granularity of telling us what is the difference between a world that goes to 1.5 degree increased temperature and a world that goes to 2 degrees, which is basically the range that is established in the Paris Agreement. And without quoting 300 pages of science to you, here's the cheat sheet version. A 2-degree world, as compared to a 1.5-degree world, would mean 2 to 3 times as much biodiversity and natural ecosystem destruction, 2 to 3 times as much physical infrastructure and our basic physical needs destruction, and 2 to 3 times as many people exposed to life-threatening heat or hunger, i.e., a scenario that is completely impossible for us to accept at any understanding of morality or responsibility as adults. Simply unacceptable. That's why Greta is on the streets. Blessed outrage, right? Blessed outrage of Greta leading 1.5 million young people on March 15th out on the streets in 88 countries of the world and growing. And thank you for doing that, because they're telling us, we're doing our homework, you oldies, you have not done your homework. Get back to work and give us a future that we can actually aspire to. Now, here's the difficulty with that. The difficulty with that, and I'm in total admiration and respect of what Greta and all of those young people are doing, but it is up to us, the adults, to figure out what is step number 2 after that. Because if that outrage, which is absolutely necessary, and I hope we all feel the same outrage, if that outrage falls into cynicism and despair, we are literally fried. That outrage has to be folded and forged into a really stubborn optimism, which is living and working in the conviction that together we have everything that it takes to do the right thing. And not accept anyone who says, oh, well, I did as much as I could. That is not an answer. The answer is we together did everything that was necessary. And that is the only answer that we can give to our young people.
Persistent optimism, yes. Nina, let me get to you. You're a journalist. You live in Mexico City. 24 million people there struggling with the effects of climate in very dramatic ways. Tell me what you're seeing.
In a city so big, you know, we have a huge stress on the water supply. Mexico City has to bring in its water from cities and areas around about the city just to supply with our everyday needs. And you have a huge inequality in the impact of the water shortage, which I think we see all over the world. So you have the poorest neighborhoods in Mexico City, the poorest people having to buy water to bathe their children because they have, you know, water twice a week coming into communal taps in their village, whereas you have the, you know, the wealthiest areas with swimming pools and, you know, plentiful water supply. But you have a real tension building up in a city where there just isn't enough water. You know, there are too many people, and there are too many people because you know, a quarter of the population almost lives in Mexico City. Why? Because living in rural areas has become unsustainable. You know, as a result of industrial farming, of free trade agreements that do not benefit small farmers, and now you have added to that climate change. You know, you have unpredictable weathers, you have extreme weathers, and so people are forced to leave their communities, and people are forced to leave their, you know, to leave what they've always done to come to cities where there are not enough resources for everybody. And I think just an important factor to add to that is that water has become, like lots of things like climate change, a political issue. You have politicians or you know, officials coming in making very good plans, but which require a 10, 20-year investment, and no politician wants to do that. You know, they're thinking about the political cycle 4 to 6 years, sure. You know, and I think that makes it really difficult. And if I can just give one other example, I work a lot in Central America, in Honduras. Tegucigalpa is you'll have all have heard of Honduras for the migrant caravan that's been, you know, had a lot of press in the US these last couple of years. This is a country where a corrupt government has sold off all of its rivers, almost all of its rivers for so-called renewable energy projects. And yet I spend a lot of time in that country, and In the city, in Tegucigalpa, in the capital, in the dry season, we have 1 hour of water every 3 days. I'm not sure you can imagine what that's like to wake up every day and think, what am I going to do? Am I going to flush the toilet? Am I going to bathe with this much water? Am I going to wash clothes? You know, that's what it's like. That's the reality of a country which actually is rich in water. It has a lot of rivers, but climate change plus sort of corrupt policies and corrupt sort of, projects which do not benefit its own population are causing huge water shortages in the rest of the, for the vast majority, and that causes friction, it causes conflict, and it causes migration.
And we'll get to the climate refugee question in our next round, but I want to get to Cristina. You're a marine biologist, but also a storyteller, a lyrical one at that, and one of the most important photos that you took, which was a story, a narrative in itself, brought a lot of attention to climate. It was designed to inspire people to change. Tell us about the polar bear photo.
Yeah, that was a that was a photo that I've been trying to make for a long time, because one of the problems with being a storyteller and trying to document climate change, it's like trying to document a slow-moving tsunami.
Sure.
You know, it's so difficult to capture in a single image that can jolt people into action. And for me, this photograph was an invitation to the world to imagine what the future is going to hold. And interestingly, you know, people embraced the story and made it their own. And they injected their own fears, their own frustrations, their own anxiety over climate change into this image, and it went viral. So it became controversial because, you know, in the internet, people appropriate the message and they turn it into whatever they want. And a lot of climate deniers use this image to further their side of the story.
And yet, what was your reaction, you know, on a gut level to capturing this image that moved so many?
I love animals. I mean, for me, being a photographer out in nature is this selfish pursuit of being in nature with animals. And seeing an animal suffer like this, it's a horrible experience. But I knew, because I photographed dead polar bears and other animals that have died of climate change, that just doesn't trigger an emotional reaction. And when we read that in the next 50 years we're going to lose polar bears as a species, that they might go extinct, you know, it's difficult for people to imagine what that looks like.
Right.
I wanted for people to know that this is not just a point in a data sheet. This is what a starving animal looks like.
These are not just high concepts. These are realities on the ground.
And starvation is a horrible way to die. For any animal, for any person.
For any human.
For a human. Yeah. And that is the extended metaphor for humanity. Dr. Mae, let me get to you. You're the only American, per se, on the panel. What do you think, how are we doing as a country? I mean, President Trump loudly withdrew from the Paris Accord. Into that breach came a lot of cities and mayors. You've given an eloquent TED Talk about radical leaps and innovations in technology. Give us a status report.
So I'm not sure I can go and get a full status report. I can say that we actually have incredible and sufficient amounts of technology, sufficient amounts of data, sufficient knowledge to know that we have to do something. And we are stymied from doing that, I believe, because we are not connected. We don't see ourselves as being involved. We think that we can wait it out, or that it just means something for someone else. So images like the polar bear makes us feel something. And in fact, I think a quote from Helen Keller sort of puts us best when we think about science. Science and technology, they're wonderful things. But she said, science has no remedy for the worst evil of them all, the apathy of humans. And it is as we apply the technology to make a difference. It's been since I went to college in the 1970s. We had solar panels up on the roof of the White House at the time. It was torn down and the belligerent ignorance of people not believing, right? People who are in policy-making positions, just belligerently ignorant and not believing or wanting to have the best for the rest of humanity, not connecting, is a problem. But what are some of the hope notes? So we have solar energy panels. Sometimes we think about what's going to be the really four-year degree person who's going to do something, or the graduate school engineer. There's these women in Mali, grandmothers, right? We have smart grandmothers who were taught and who build solar panels and electrify villages in Mali, near Timbuktu. So we have people who have very little who are doing amazing things. And here in this country, We're just getting around to really sort of going all out with alternative energy, with different forms of energy. We have lots of possibilities, from carbon capture to knowing that we can't continue to just use gas blowers or leaf blowers. There's so many things that we could do, but the issue is really around having an emotional connection and knowing that we have possibilities.
We were chatting backstage, and you said that a lot of it is science literacy and the importance of that in getting people involved.
And I think the science literacy helps us to understand, for example, that you can't keep doing something and then snatch it from the jaws of defeat at the last minute. Science literacy is a whole idea that someone can read an article in the newspaper about the environment, about climate, and understand that climate isn't the same as weather.
Sure.
Right? Those are the things we have to do.
I also want to have you all jump in on this idea that sometimes it's important to sort of change the framework of the question, that it's not that Earth needs humans or that we need to save the planet, because in fact the planet isn't technically dying. It doesn't need us, that it's humans that need the planet.
Yeah, can I go back to believing, the word believe, and I'm very grateful that you went to science literacy, because honestly I really think that we have to do a search and replace for all those people who repeat that X person or whatever doesn't believe in climate change. I have news for you. Climate change is not a religion. It's not a myth. It's not a, ritualistic practice. It's science.
And the Earth doesn't care, right?
Exactly. And, if you refuse to believe in science, then please refuse to believe in gravity and refuse to believe that the Earth is round, because it all actually is science.
And let me just add on to that. When people always talk about when astronauts are in space and you look back down at the Earth and you think that everything that is relevant in the universe is here on that planet, and I didn't have that feeling. I had the feeling that the Earth will be here. It doesn't really matter. We have to save ourselves. And it's really about really getting that understanding that this planet will be here. Space is not a plan B. I would go to Mars. I'd go to another star in a heartbeat. But for generations to come, we're going to be here. And science does require us, as you said, to believe in gravity, the Earth is round, and antibiotics, which everybody likes to use, right?
Yeah.
And there's one more aspect to this. The Earth doesn't need humans, and humans may very well go extinct, if we really kill our life support system. But the last 100 years are going to be miserable. And I am afraid of that.
Right.
I don't want to be here for that type of...
And the other thing, sorry, Juju, the other thing is that, as you said, it really is our connection to nature that nurtures our connection to ourselves and to the true meaning and the most important fundamental purpose of being here, right? So we cannot sacrifice. Yes, I was invited to the 4.5 billionth birthday party of the planet to remind me that, the planet has been here a while and will be here later. But it's only been in the past 6,000 years of those 4.5 billion that we've really had civilization as we know it today. And yet, it's a very, very short period.
Yes. And yet, while the planet is not dying, the planet as we know it, aspect of it is changing and dying. Tell us about what you're seeing underwater, because you have your nonprofit SeaLegacy, and ocean conservation is very important.
I think if a spaceship landed on Earth today and they looked down on us, they would say, oh, of course, this is an ocean planet, and all of these are ocean creatures. But we forget about that. And our oceans are quietly dying in complete obscurity. I was diving in Bahamas last week, expecting to find a living coral reef in marine protected areas, and you put your head underwater and it's all dead. It's dying quietly. There's no headlines. Nobody's talking about it. For me, the problem of climate change is not a problem of science. We know. It's a problem of communications. The fact that we have not invested enough in making sure that everybody is alarmed, engaged, activated, and participating in the solutions. We have them already.
And the ocean captures so much carbon and produces so much oxygen quietly.
There's a whole movement of scientists that are reminding us that the best solution for climate change are the natural system that our planet already has. Living forests, living mangroves, living reefs, all of these capture carbon but they also, prevent more carbon from being released. When they die, all that carbon goes into the atmosphere.
Nina, let me get you to talk about you've talked about how indigenous communities are, in fact, as Christiana pointed out, living closest to the earth. I read a statistic that in 2015, according to one UN estimate, if all things remain equal, 200 million people will become displaced by climate change. Tell me about what you're seeing in terms of the refugee crisis.
I think it's a combination of factors that we're seeing, I think, and climate change is playing an increasingly sort of large part in that. Though people, the communities I work with, don't call it climate change. What they tell you is that, for hundreds and hundreds of years, their ancestors, their families have lived in a very sustainable way. They've farmed, they've looked after the rivers, they've looked after sort of their environment, and they've lived, good, sustainable lives, and all of a sudden that doesn't work anymore. Temperatures are higher. So, for example, in Central America, where coffee has been a real cash crop over the, over many years, 70% of the coffee crop has been wiped out in the last 5 or 6 years, most probably because of a fungus, and that fungus actually is killed at a low temperature, and we're just not getting to those temperatures anymore. So that's 70% of a coffee crop, in a whole region. Rains are unpredictable, so people no longer know when to plant maize, when to plant their sort of basic grains. And if they don't know when to do that, or if the rains come unpredictable times, and there's droughts are more common, floods are more common, and you also have on top of that sort of cash crops, like crops like African palms and sugar canes, which are being planted for biofuels, which are then exported to the West. You have a situation where people just don't have the ability or they don't have the resources to live off anymore, and what that causes is migration, first of all, to cities, like Mexico City, to Tegucigalpa, to these other cities, and then to the US. I mean, the World Bank itself predicts that in the next 30 years, 4 million people in Central America will be forced to leave Central America because of climate change. I think that's a huge underestimate.
Yeah.
I think huge numbers of people that are coming to the US now are actually climate change and environmental destruction is a key part of that. Food insecurity is up there with violence, and they're very interconnected.
Christiana, do you see corporate partnerships changing the economic model so that it's not just doing good but doing well, that the profit incentive in coming up with solutions, do you see that as the future?
Yeah, I think, everything that we have said is absolutely true, and it breaks our heart. And at the same time, in equal standing, let's see what is actually occurring, right? So to begin with, we have 1.3 billion people around the earth who still do not have electricity and hence are in abject poverty. Today, we have the technologies that we did not have 5 or 10 years ago to actually bring basic electricity to every single human being on this planet. What does that do? That elevates immediately that family, particularly women, because now they don't have to walk, I don't know how long, 2 or 3 hours to do all of the, the food gathering and the cooking and all of that is so time consuming for those people. So we can do that with renewable energy because it is completely distributed. You can put a little solar panel on, technically, we still have to figure out how to finance it, but you can put a little solar panel on every single hut that does not have electricity. That is very good news. Secondly, we have moved from having 3% renewable energy, and renewable energy will cut down sizably on greenhouse gas emissions. We're already up to 23% of all of the electricity that is produced in the world. We're already at 23%, well on track to hit 50% by 2030. Absolutely very good news. And finally, finance and corporates, right? We have $8.5 trillion that have actually already, in the past 5 years, moved from being invested in the high carbon over to clean technologies. 8.5 trillion. And with that, thousands of corporations that have understood this is where growth is. If they want to have any business continuity in the 21st century, they better be aware of profit, planet, and people. And if they do not have a triple bottom line, they have no space in the 21st century because our young people won't want to work for them to begin with.
So, Mae, let me just frame it for a second, because we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to link gender and climate, right? Both, Nina, in terms of the people who are most affected and the people who are leading the voices for change. But go ahead, Mae.
You know, I just want us to stop for a second and just deal with some truth, which has to do with lifestyle and what we assume. So in the lesser developed countries and places where people don't have a lot, we do owe them as a world to make sure that they do better. But we also have to deal with how much we extract from the planet. This whole idea of how much in continuing profit and enough is never enough does have implications. And we have to deal with our lifestyles. I live in Houston, Texas. It's always over air conditioned. It can be, you know, 100 degrees. You go inside, you have to wear. Where do we start to deal with our lifestyle and our consumption, making sure we do things more efficiently and better? And we do have the technologies. Those incentives come not just from corporations making profits, but also the issues of regulation, which is really, I know we hate to say that word, but it is real, and it is something that we have to look at, and the technologies that are employed at any point in time have to be paid attention to.
We have about 4 minutes, which gives you each about a minute summary. But let me just give you Christiana's 5 tips that she gave recently, which are really adorable. And you can wax on that or keep going. 5 things that you can do. 1, eat less red meat. 2, examine your commute. 3, insulate. Don't air condition everybody. 3, invest your money. Think of where you do that. And 5, vote. Vote for the leaders who are speaking for faith. That's Christiana's thing. So, less than a minute, 45 seconds each. Nina, let me start with you. And think, too, about gender and climate.
I think in the communities that I work in, women and children are at the forefront of leading resistance against climate change, against environmentally destructive projects, because they're the ones that suffer the most. And that can be for all sorts of reasons. One of those reasons is because many of the menfolk in communities have migrated, often to the US. So they're at the forefront trying to protect their rivers, they're trying to protect their land in order to continue to have a sustainable lifestyle. I think we do have new technologies, but I think in the communities that I work in, what people would say is that these new projects and renewable energies come to their communities not for the benefit of them. They come and they produce energy to be exported to the US, to Canada, to produce biofuels that then go to Europe. And they do not have any benefits from that. You know, and I agree with Dr. Mae, we as people in the West have to think about what we're prepared to sacrifice, you know, that constant air conditioning, cheap fuel, all of these things, because all of these communities where there are mega dams, where there are solar panels, they still do not have electricity. They've lost their land and they've lost their rivers and they've lost their sustainable lifestyles without any benefit. And I think we have to take ownership of that, right? That for us to continue to have every electronic gadget that we want, that comes at a price, and actually electricity and fuel cannot be worth more as a human right than water and food and life. And that is what is happening in the region that I work with.
Nina, thank you for that reminder. That was fantastic. Christina, can you help us sum up? We've got 2 minutes.
Yeah, I just want to remind us all that climate change is going to be the defining issue of our generation. And we cannot solve this problem if 50% of the population on this planet is disenfranchised to participate in the solutions. So speaking up and lifting other women is paramount. But this is also a problem of finances. In this country, we raise about $300 billion in philanthropy. About 30% goes to religion, and then to education, the arts, humanities, blah, blah, blah. 3% goes to the environment. 3% to the oceans, climate change, wildlife, biodiversity. Think about how you align your values with your resources, because that's a huge part of the solution.
Money talks. Yes, Mae.
Just my reiteration is that we cannot survive without the earth and the environment and the climate that we have now. We can't survive. We couldn't have survived at the earth at the beginning. We're not going to be able to survive in the climate of the earth a million years from now. We need to make sure that this climate stays one in which we can live and survive. What the role with women is, we have to use our place at the table every day and make sure that we are creating the standards by which we judge success, and that we own up to that and not let anyone tell us that we have to make everybody feel okay. Some of this may be uncomfortable.
Appreciate that reminder, too. Christiana, bring us home.
You know, what is up for me after this delightful conversation is radical alignment. And what I mean by that is, how do we step up to this challenge? We need to understand what are the principles and values that are dear and deeply rooted in me as an individual, as a mother, as a daughter, as a hopeful grandmother, and take those values and principles to the outside world. You cannot address the global issues that we have in this 21st century by assuming that we can be one person at home and a different person at work, or one person at home and a different person as a political or as a corporate leader. Folks, we need to align our values and our principles. What I want for my 2 daughters, I want for every child, including the children that are being born in the Sahel right now and who I will never know. But we have to be able to understand that having reached planetary boundaries, there's no such thing as the zero-sum game anymore. There's no such thing as you win and I lose, or I lose and you win. From now on, either we all lose or we all win together. That's a very different century.
Thank you so much for that summation. Thank you. Ladies, thank you. I know that we all sleep better at night because of the work that you're doing. We are grateful to you, and I know this entire auditorium wants to lock arms with you and work to help save the planet. Thank you. Thank you.